What's up, gang? Stephen Marshall, themanslife.com. Just got back from 4 days of elk hunting in the mountains of eastern Kentucky with my oldest son, who's now 15. And about 20 years ago, the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, in connection with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, released elk into Kentucky as part of an attempt to restore elk to their original range here in Kentucky, which used to be full of elk back in the days of Daniel Boone. But they were all killed off, and for many years we didn't have elk. And if you wanted to go hunt elk, you had to go out west to Colorado or Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, somewhere out there. But we now have elk in Kentucky, and we don't have enough elk for everyone who wants to hunt them, so we have a lottery system. Where you put in and hope to get drawn for an elk tag. And after 4 or 5 years of my son and I both applying, this year I got selected for a cow elk tag with firearm. And this past week, December 25th to the 29th, was my time to go hunt elk. And I wasn't going to leave my family on Christmas Day, so on December 26th, my oldest and I headed out 3 hours east to go hunt elk. And we had put in to hunt in an elk regulated area, which is a mix of public and private land that you're allowed to hunt if you have an elk tag. And I got selected for a particular tract of land down at the border of Pike County and Letcher County. I think it's actually in Letcher County, really on the border of Kentucky and Virginia. And if you know anything about elk, they are really highland creatures. They like to be up in the mountains, and that's a mountainous part of Kentucky. And so basically I hunted at the top of a coal mine. And this area, there was an agreement with one of the local coal companies to allow people to hunt up there. And so we went and we had to do hazard training, safety training, so that we'd be safe around the coal mine the first thing. And I want to give a shout out to Jeff Cornett, who trained us and got us ready to hunt up in that area. Our hunt would not have been nearly as meaningful and as full of experiences as it was due to Jeff's training. So I wanted to give a real shout out to him. And the type of hunting you do up in that area is what's called spot and stalk hunting. We are primarily whitetail deer hunters. And in this part of the country, in the east, you hunt for whitetail deer via ambush hunting, which means you set up somewhere, typically in a tree or on the ground. You set up somewhere where you expect the animals to come to you. And so it's called ambush hunting, where you sit in an ambush point to kill them as they walk by your spot. But elk hunting is more spot and stalk hunting, which means that we spend our time traveling around the top of this mountain, looking from ridge to ridge to find elk. And my particular elk was a cow tag, which is a female elk. And so we were looking for them on the ridges, and their coats this time of year in Kentucky are kind of a cream color, a really light tan, not quite white, but really light. And so they stand out on the browns and the greens that you see and the grays that you see on these ridges. And so we just spend our time running around, searching ridge tops, searching ridge lines for these cream colored coats that stood out. And once we saw one, we'd use our binoculars to figure out, was it a bull or was it a cow? And if we identify a cow, our job was then we'd spotted the animal, then it was to stalk it, figure out the terrain, figure out which way the wind is blowing, to get in close enough to get a good, ethical, quickly lethal kill shot on the animal so that it died a quick and humane death. I'll tell you the end from the beginning. We didn't kill a cow, but it was a fantastic trip. And everyone who's a hunter and everyone who's a father will understand why it was a fantastic trip. We saw elk every single day. But the thing was, we saw mostly bulls, the males with the huge antlers, and we couldn't shoot those. We couldn't hunt those. But seeing them was so cool, especially it was our first time seeing elk, first time being around elk. And so this particular area was full of game species. There were black bears, there were white-tailed deer, the elk, and there were also plenty of coyotes. So everywhere you turned, there was animal sign of some kind, whether it was scat or clawed up ground, tracks in the ground, or if there was maybe trees that had been torn up, rubs on the trees where they've been rubbing their antlers or rubbing their backs, something like that. And so just being around all these animals was fantastic. And being up in the mountains, the views were simply breathtaking. I got one of the most incredible pictures. If you follow me on Twitter, it's now, for the time being, it's my cover photo, my banner on Twitter. And it's this miraculous sunrise that I captured Monday, December the 27th. And the sun just looks like it's on fire coming up over the mountain. So it's really cool. Check that out if you haven't seen it. So taking in those vistas, the mountain views, being there with my son day in and day out, being in among the elk, it was just something I'll never forget. Some of the particularly meaningful parts were the first time that we spotted an elk on a ridge line, saw it from about 1,500 yards away. My son and I both at the same time reached for the binoculars, and I looked at him and I said, "You see what I see?" And sure enough, once we got the binos on it, it was an elk. And so that was our first one. That was really cool to spot that. The second one was the next day, and my son spotted these two elk, which we thought were bulls, really on a mountaintop, a significant distance in elevation above us. But we figured out a way to get up there, and we pulled off a stalk, so to speak, even though we weren't going to be able to shoot. And we popped out of this tree line directly underneath the two bulls, about 85 yards below them, in the fog. And so looking up on that ridge line, 85 yards above, and seeing those majestic creatures up there, we'll never forget it. And we just spent a good amount of time standing there watching them. And they looked like they were looking directly down at us. I couldn't tell exactly if they could see us and just didn't care, or if they were looking right over us and couldn't see us. But they were completely unfazed by our presence. So that was really cool. And then the third thing that was really cool was the last day. We were getting ready to leave, and my son spotted 3 cows bedded. It was in the early afternoon, and they were bedded down. It was the first time we'd seen cows the whole week. And that's what we were there to hunt. We'd always seen bulls, but we hadn't seen any cows, and we finally saw them. And the way he saw them, and again, these were probably, 1,500 yards to a mile away. And he spotted them. We put the binos on them to make sure they were elk, and sure enough, they were cows bedded down. But when we checked out our map, our Onyx map, our GPS, they were on a part of the landscape that was not part of the property that we were allowed to hunt. We weren't allowed to hunt that particular area, which was a real bummer, because we really wanted to kill an elk. Elk meat is really the best wild game meat. It's fantastic, and wanted to kill one. But we decided we'd drive over there anyway, just to get closer on the GPS, just to confirm, to make sure that our long distance assessment was correct, that they weren't on our property. So we went over to where they were, and where we thought they were, and sure enough, we couldn't hunt them. And so we decided we could go on the property without trespassing, because it was still public land. It just wasn't an area that we were allowed to hunt. And so we did a stalk to try to get to them, and along the way we bumped out a really nice bull out of its bed. And we could see him, and he scampered off just a bit. We went in a bit closer and actually got in his bed, and he scampered off a bit more. We could hear him crashing through the woods. and just standing there in its bed, seeing how it had clawed up the ground. It had been rubbing its antlers all over the trees and just taking away the bark on the trees. Tons of scat everywhere, as big as my shoe. And the smell, that was something that we really was kind of on our list to experience, was to smell an elk. Because if you're going to smell it, you've got to be close. And you always hear, guys that hunt elk all the time, they'll tell you when they know elk are near because they smell them and they have a distinct smell. And to me, it smelled a lot like a horse. But to stand there in that animal's bed, knowing that we had located it, we had found it, and we'd gotten right in that dude's bedroom and could smell it all, and could really experience what it experienced, it was so cool. And we had to end up backing out, and our hunt was over, empty-handed, without meat. But those 3 days on that mountain with my oldest son, we will never forget it. I'll never forget the first time I saw an elk, and he'll never forget it. And that's a story that he'll tell to his son. So if you've ever hunted before, if you've got kids, you appreciate the importance of that. And so that was our week in elk hunting. The folks at of the Cole Company could not have been better. They were extremely friendly and encouraging and supportive. I didn't know what to expect. These are rough coal mining guys, and we were at their place, and honestly, probably just in their way. But they could not have been nicer. They all asked how we were doing, how our hunt was going, what we'd seen. They all tried to give us tips on where to go, where to look, what to expect. And to a man, every one of them, you could tell they wanted us to have a successful and meaningful hunt. And at the end of the day, that was mission accomplished. So just giving my report. Hope you guys find some value in that. I always talk about taking your family on adventures. And I was lucky enough to take my oldest on an elk hunting adventure that neither one of us will ever forget. That's the man's life. You guys have a great day. I'm out.